The Benin bronzes are a group of several thousand metal plaques and sculptures that decorated the royal palace of the Kingdom of Benin, in what is now Edo State, Nigeria. The metal plaques were produced by the Guild of Benin Bronze Casters, now located in Igun Street, also known as Igun Arinwan Quarters. Collectively, the objects form the best examples of Benin art and were created from the 14th century by artists of the Edo people. The plaques, which in the Edo language are called ama, depict scenes or represent themes in the history of the kingdom. Apart from the plaques, other sculptures in brass or bronze include portrait heads, jewelry, and smaller pieces. Some of the dramatic sculptures date to the 14th century, but the bulk of the collection dates to the 15th and 16th centuries. It is believed that two golden ages in Benin metal workmanship occurred during the reigns of Esidi Floruit 1550 and of Arasoyan 1735-1750, when their workmanship achieved its highest quality. Most of the plaques and other objects were taken by British forces during the Benin expedition of 1897 as the British Empire's control was being consolidated in southern Nigeria. This expedition was positioned by British sources as retaliation for a massacre of an unarmed party of British envoys and a large number of their African bearers in January 1897. Some contemporary scholars, such as Dan Hicks, argue that the expedition was part of a broader series of premeditated attacks, framed as retaliatory or punitive, to further European imperialistic and economic interests in Africa. Following the expedition, 200 pieces were taken to the British Museum in London, while the rest were taken to other European museums. A large number are held by the British Museum, and with other notable collections in Germany and the United States. The Kingdom of Benin was a hub of African civilization long before Portuguese traders visited, and bronzes were made in Benin prior to the arrival of the Portuguese. The Benin bronze sculpture tradition is thought to have derived from or been influenced by that of the older nearby Kingdom of Ife in southwest Nigeria. While the collection is known as the Benin bronzes, like most West African bronzes, the pieces are mostly made of brass of variable composition. There are also pieces made of mixtures of bronze and brass, of wood, of ceramic, and of ivory, among other materials. The metal pieces were made using lost wax casting and are considered among the best African sculptures made using this technique. 21 Benin began to trade ivory, pepper, with the Portuguese in the late 15th century and incorporated the use of Manila's brass ingots in the form of bracelets, bought from the Portuguese, as a metal source in their sculpture. Many of the dramatic sculptures date to the 13th century, and a large part of the collection dates to the 15th and 16th centuries. It is believed that two golden ages in Benin metal workmanship occurred during the reigns of Esidi Floruit 1550 and of Arasoyan 1735-1750, when their workmanship achieved its highest quality. The Kingdom of Benin, which occupied southern parts of present-day Nigeria between the 14th and 19th centuries, was rich in sculptures of diverse materials, such as iron, bronze, wood, ivory, and terracotta. The Oba's Palace in Benin City, the site of production for the royal ancestral altars, also was the site for an elaborate court ceremonial life in which the Oba of Benin, his warriors, chiefs and titleholders, priests, members of the palace societies and their constituent guilds, foreign merchants and mercenaries, and numerous retainers and attendants all took part. The palace, a vast sprawling agglomeration of buildings and courtyards, was the setting for hundreds of rectangular brass plaques whose relief images portray the persons and events that animated the court. Bronze and ivory objects had a variety of functions in the ritual and courtly life of the Kingdom of Benin. They were used principally to decorate the royal palace, which contained many bronze works. They were hung on the pillars of the palace by nails punched through them. As a courtly art, their principal objective was to glorify the Oba, the divine king, and the history of his imperial power, or to honor the Iyoba of Benin, the Queen Mother. Art in the Kingdom of Benin took many forms, of which bronze and brass reliefs and the heads of kings and queen mothers are the best known. Bronze receptacles, bells, ornaments, jewelry, and ritual objects also possessed aesthetic qualities and originality, demonstrating the skills of their makers, although they are often eclipsed by figurative works in bronze and ivory carvings. In tropical Africa, the technique of lost wax casting was developed early, as the works from Benin show. When a king died, his successor would order that a bronze head be made of his predecessor. Approximately 170 of these sculptures exist, and the oldest date from the 12th century. The Oba, or king, monopolized the materials that were most difficult to obtain, such as gold, elephant tusks, and bronze. These kings made possible the creation of the splendid Benin bronzes. Thus, the royal courts contributed substantially to the development of sub-Saharan art. In 1939, heads very similar to those of the Kingdom of Benin were discovered in Ife, the holy city of the Yoruba, which dated to the 14th and 15th centuries. This discovery supported an earlier tradition holding that it was artists from Ife who had taught Benin the techniques of bronze metalworking. Recognition of the antiquity of the technology in Benin advanced when these sculptures were dated definitively to that era. European interest in the Benin expedition of 1897. Few examples of African art had been collected by Europeans prior to the 19th century, though European printed books already included images of Benin City and of the Oba's Palace from the early 1600s onward. Only at the beginning of the 19th century, when colonization and missionary activity began, did larger numbers of African works begin to be taken to Europe, where they were described as simple curiosities of pagan cults. This attitude changed after the Benin expedition of 1897. In 1897, the Vice-Consul General James Robert Phillips, of the Niger Coast Protectorate, the delegation's stated aim was to negotiate with the Oba of Benin, while some historians contend that it was a reconnaissance mission disguised as a peaceful diplomatic delegation with the goal of ultimately overthrowing the King Oba of Benin. Although they had given word of their intended visit, they were later informed that their journey must be delayed, because no foreigner could enter the city while rituals were being conducted. However, the travelers ignored the warning and continued on their expedition. They were ambushed at the south of the city by Oba warriors, and only 2 Europeans survived the ensuing massacre. News of the incident reached London 8 days later, and a naval punitive expedition was organized immediately, which was to be directed by Admiral Harry Rawson. British forces sacked and destroyed Benin City. Following the attack, the victors took the works of art decorating the royal palace and the residences of the nobility, which had been accumulated over many centuries. According to the official account of this event written by the British, the attack was warranted because the local people had ambushed a peaceful mission, and because the expedition liberated the population from a reign of terror. The 2020 book suggests that, since the 1960s, historians have increasingly understood the expedition to depose Oba Ovanramwen Nagbezi Overami, who had acceded to the throne in 1888, not as a retaliation, but to have been dictated by policy for a long time. Some consider that this creates an ambiguity surrounding the objects, ownership which has bearing on the possible modern return of the bronzes to Benin. The works taken by the British were a treasure hoard of bronze and ivory sculptures, including king heads, queen mother heads, leopard figurines, bells, and a great number of images sculpted in high relief, all of which were executed with a mastery of lost wax casting. In 1910, German researcher Leo Frobenius carried out an expedition to Africa with the aim of collecting works of African art for museums in his country. Today perhaps as few as 50 pieces remain in Nigeria, although approximately 2,400 pieces are held in European and American collections. Division among museums. The Benin bronzes that were part of the booty of the punitive expedition of 1897 had different destinations. One portion ended up in the private collections of various British officials. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office sold a large number, which later ended up in various European museums, mainly in Germany, and in American museums. The high quality of the pieces was reflected in the high prices they fetched on the market. The Foreign Office gave a large quantity of bronze wall plaques to the British Museum. These plaques illustrated the history of the Benin Kingdom in the 15th and 16th century. Subsequent sales, restitutions and repatriations. The 2 largest collections of Benin bronzes are located in the Ethnological Museum of Berlin and in the British Museum in London, while the 3rd largest collection is located in several museums in Nigeria, principally the Nigerian National Museum in Lagos. Since gaining independence in 1960, Nigeria has sought the return of the bronzes on several occasions. There has also been extensive debate over the location of the bronzes being distant from their place of origin. Often, their return has been considered emblematic of the repatriation of the African continent. The artifacts have become a test case in the international debate over restitution, comparable to that of the Elgin marbles, and help change attitudes towards repatriation. The British Museum sold more than 30 Benin bronzes to the Nigerian government between 1950 and 1972. In 1950, the museum's curator Herman Braunholz declared that, although made individually, of the 203 plaques acquired by the museum in 1898, 30 were duplicates. Because they were identical representations, he determined that they were superfluous for the museum and were sold. The sales stopped in 1972, and the museum's African art specialist said that they regretted the sales. A newspaper publication revealed that in 1953, Sotheby's sold a Benin bronze head for £5,500 when the previous record sale was £780. In 1968, Christie's sold for £21,000 a Benin head that was discovered by an officer around his neighbor's greenhouse. In 1984, Sotheby's auctioned a plaque depicting a musician. Its value was estimated at between £25,000 and £35,000 in the auction catalogue. In 2015, a Benin bronze head was sold to a private collector for a record fee of £10 million. In 2018, an agreement was made between the Benin Dialogue Group (BDG) and the government in London to return Benin bronzes that will be used to form a temporary exhibition at the new Benin Royal Museum in Edo State. The group comprises representatives of several international museums, the Royal Court of Benin, Edo State Government and the Nigerian National Commission for Museums and Monuments. In 2015, Mark Walker returned some Benin bronzes that were taken by his grandfather during the siege on Benin Kingdom, and he was received by Prince Edina Kenzua in Benin City. The University of Aberdeen agreed in March 2021 to return a bronze head of an Oba that had been purchased at an auction in 1957. The return was completed at a handover ceremony held on the 28th of October 2021. In Cologne, Germany, December 2022. Signing of the agreement to transfer the Benin bronzes of the city to Nigeria. In April 2021, the German government declared the restitution of looted Benin bronzes in Germany's public collections by 2022. Hartmut Dorgerloh, the director of the Humboldt Forum, which incorporates the Ethnological Museum of Berlin, said at a press event that exhibiting the Benin bronzes in the new museum complex in Berlin as earlier planned is now not imaginable. Also in April 2021, the Church of England promised to return 2 Benin bronzes that were given as gifts to the then Archbishop of Canterbury Robert Runcie almost 40 years ago. These bronzes were meant to join the collection of the future Benin Royal Museum. Needs update. In the same month, the Horniman Museum in South London said it was considering legal advice in terms of repatriation and restitution of 49 works from Benin City, including 15 brass plaques, weapons and jewellery. In response to the British Museum's continued refusal to return looted Benin bronzes, the IA's traditional Prime Minister of Benin Kingdom unveiled the largest bronze plaque to date on the 30th of July 2021. The plaque contains over 2 tons of brass and was created by one of the grandsons of the current IAs of Benin Kingdom, Lucas Osorobo Zeitner Okoro. It is titled, The Return of Oba Uware, to symbolize the Benin belief in reincarnation and a restart of the Benin Bronze Age in the reign of the current Oba of Benin, Uware II. It therefore honors the Oba and was even offered in exchange for the bronzes held by the British Museum. In October 2021, Jesus College, Cambridge, announced that it would be repatriating a sculpture of a cockerel, known as Okakor, to Nigeria, on the 27th of October, after the student body brought to light its historical significance as a looted artifact. The statue had previously been removed from display in 2016, after student calls for the statue to be repatriated. Following investigation by the college's Legacy of Slavery Working Party (LSWP), it was ascertained that the statue had been directly taken from the Court of Benin, and had been gifted to the college by the father of a student in 1905. In February 2022, 2 Benin bronzes, the bust of a head of an Oba and the bronze cockerel Okakor, that had been returned by the University of Aberdeen and Jesus College, Cambridge, were received at the Royal Palace in Benin City by the Oba of Benin, Uware II. In December 2022, the University of Cambridge legally transferred ownership of more than 100 Benin artifacts from its Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology to the National Commission of Museums and Monuments (NCMM) of Nigeria. A museum spokesperson declared that some of the pieces were to remain in Cambridge, on extended loan, to ensure that this West African civilization continues to be represented in the museum's displays, and in teaching for school groups. In November 2021, the Metropolitan Museum of Art transferred 2 16th-century bronze plaques, a warrior chief and junior court official, to the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. This transfer is not to be confused as a response to repatriation requests, as the institution owns a collection of about 160 Benin bronzes. The Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of African Art signed over ownership of 29 Benin bronzes to the Nigerian National Commission for Museums and Monuments in a formal ceremony on the 11th of October 2022, in Washington, D.C., with Nigerian leaders and cultural officials in attendance. At the same time, the National Gallery of Art returned 1 Benin bronze. The U.S. Supreme Court denied a petition to block the Smithsonian from returning the bronzes. The petition was filed by the Restitution Study Group, who argued the bronzes are linked to the descendants of enslaved people in America, because they were made with metal ingots traded for African slaves, and removing the bronzes would deny Americans the opportunity to experience their heritage. On the 1st of July 2022, Germany announced the immediate ownership transfer of 1,100 artifacts held by the Linden Museum in Stuttgart, Berlin's Humboldt Forum, the Cologne Raudenstrauch Joest Museum, Hamburg's Museum am Rothenbaum, and the State Ethnographic Collections of Saxony to Nigeria. The 1st of July 2022, Germany announced the physical return of each item will be negotiated between the German museums and the Nigerian government, and some of the objects could remain in display in Germany under custody agreements. Hermann Parzinger, the head of the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation, an authority that oversees many of Berlin's museums, said a representative collection of objects would remain in the German capital on a long-term loan.